Great, thank you, Phil, and thank you all for joining for the first of what I hope is many annual conferences for the Institute of Security and Technology. As Phil accurately mentioned, IST is essentially a startup. It's a startup think tank that's based on the West Coast, and we founded it with the notion that many of the security challenges that we face, both at home and around the world, have a very serious and strong technology nexus. And this kind of organization here began really very simply, as many startups do, with essentially conversations around a dinner table. A couple of, call them concerned citizens living out in Silicon Valley, some with a background in DC like Phil and myself, some with pure technological backgrounds, would get together and talk about security challenges that we were facing. And they ranged from issues of nuclear security, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and so on. What we began to realize is that many of these conversations were actually kind of happening in a vacuum, or that they were happening in one sense in the technology sector or in Silicon Valley, and in another sense in a completely different conversation happening in Washington, DC. And so, we quickly realized that many of these problems require both of those communities, in fact, all of us, working together to try and solve them. And so after a couple months of shouting at the rain, we said, well, why don't we try to be the solution? And we ended up building a structure around these dinner parties and creating the organization that eventually became IST, which you all know today. And our goal, as Phil also mentioned, is to try to not only bridge the policymaker technology divide, but really to create solutions that can be implemented by the technology industry, the government, and also all of us. And I think that the ransomware task force report that many of you are familiar with is a great example of that, right? It was a public-private collaboration, arguably mostly driven by the private sector, but it included the government, it included individual contributors, it included the business community, and created a report that has a piece for all of us in it, right? To try to solve. And so these are the kinds of things that we want to be able to deliver in the future. So with that in mind, it's a really great opportunity for me here to introduce our first lightning speaker, Pamela Clegg. Pamela is the VP of Financial Investigations at Ciphertrace. She's a US-based cryptocurrency intelligence investigator and analyst, financial crimes investigator, and certified anti-money laundering specialist. That's an incredible biography. In addition, she's also a former BSA officer and information security officer for a large community bank. Pamela has over 10 years of international experience with investigations, due diligence, and operations, mostly in Latin America for the US government. Pamela, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here today. I very much appreciate the theme of challenges because this is quite the challenge, right, to cover the crypto economy in 10 minutes. And I thought that this was going to be my greatest challenge today. And then I ended up testifying in front of European Parliament this morning, and I only had 5 minutes for that presentation. So you guys have actually been outdone as far as challenges there. I thought for today, what I would do with this really quick overview of the crypto economy is kind of follow in that theme, follow that thread of ransomware that Philip has already mentioned since we just wrapped up the ransomware task force. I thought this would be a really great way to demonstrate the different key aspects of the crypto economy utilizing some of these ransomware actors that are out there. So if we can go ahead and move to the next slide, I'm going to start by talking about state actors. Right? We know, and we've always heard, and we hear people talk about the utilization of cryptocurrency to avoid sanctions. We have some of those state-backed cryptocurrencies, thankfully not successful yet, such as the Petro out of Venezuela. But we most certainly have seen nation states get involved in cryptocurrency as a way to fund WMD, fund their cyber programs, various different aspects that they're able to utilize. One of the examples here, the reason I threw WannaCry up here on the screen, right, referring to North Korea. So this is most certainly an aspect that we are obviously concerned about. Ciphertrace also just put out a report. You guys can grab it off of our website about the utilization of, or the association of over 4.5 million Bitcoin addresses that are tagged to Iranian IP addresses. So we can definitely see evidence of cryptocurrency being utilized by these sanctioned entities, whether that's North Korea, Iran, or other specific sanctioned entities, even including drug trafficking organizations, right? We just found some additional addresses that are being utilized by the Gulf Cartel out of Mexico. So adding in all of this information to the system and giving our users, giving law enforcement, giving exchanges, giving anybody else using this tool, regulators and banks, the ability to see that information and see when it is pegged to sanctions is completely necessary. It's definitely a step that has to move a little bit faster even. So that's going to get us into a little bit about information sharing later on. Next slide. Also, as we start looking through these other ransomware strains and moving on to other actors that are out there, right? Taking from the news, I mean, who hasn't read something about DarkSide? Everybody was up on the Colonial Pipeline. So just looking at how those funds are used and what is it that we need to be able to make decisions pre-ransomware, right? Before we actually are the victim of ransomware, what it is that we need to make decisions once we are unfortunately the victim of ransomware, and then how it is that we approach the investigation once and if a payment has been made. What can we do moving on from there? One of the things that we're going to look at, next slide, is actually being able to trace those funds and identify the ultimate destination of those funds, right? So this is what blockchain intelligence and analytics companies do. We provide these tools to law enforcement. We provide these tools to the incident response firms that are working the cases, right? Ultimately, what we're looking for in most of these cases is to end up possibly at a blue or a purple circle, which are exchanges, some type of centralized exchange where we can actually go and move out of this cyber world and move into the real world with possibly some type of identification of an individual or some type of linkage to an actual bank account, maybe moving out of the crypto world into fiat somewhere. Next slide. And really and truly, a lot of this comes down to, you know, what is the motivation behind some of these actors, right? So if we take another example from 2020 and we look at NetWalker, which was definitely a ransomware as a service, very, very prominent ransomware from 2020. We did a deep dive on this particular group. One of the things that we found very interesting about this is that the operators themselves that are creating the ransomware, right, and getting their nice little cut, we can see here a nice little 80-20% cut from the proceeds once the payments have been made. They have oftentimes different motivation than the actual affiliates, the actual guys who are purchasing that malware and then using it for their own attacks. Oftentimes, the affiliates themselves are financially motivated, 100% financially motivated, and their ultimate goal is to actually cash out those funds usually as quickly as possible. Next slide. So what we're able to see there is that they will then quickly move those funds. They will move them into exchanges, oftentimes well-known exchanges, because they are moving quite large quantities of, in this case, Bitcoin. So they need to go into an exchange that has higher liquidity than other exchanges. And what we're ultimately looking for here is some type of compliance from those exchanges so that we can get that cooperation, right? So that we can send that subpoena and get the information that we need from within the exchange. Whereas contrary to our financially motivated actors here, the NetWalker operators themselves, they appear not to be financially motivated. They are actually storing their Bitcoin in a cold wallet of a sense. They have one particular wallet where they have over 600, about 640 so Bitcoin that they just keep building up their little vault. They keep building up their supply. And it's very apparent that they're going to just sit and wait, right? They're going to wait. One of the things that I like to say when it comes to tracing cryptocurrency is if you never move the funds, I can't trace it, right? There's no funds to follow. I can't follow that trail. Next slide. So this really leads us into also something that we need to be cautious about and think about, which are privacy coins. We also need to think about the fact that these bad guys, the actors themselves, they're out there listening to the exact type formats, these sessions that we are also presenting. They get their hands on information. They keep track of all of our capabilities as well. This was just an example using Revil, another prominent strain that in 2019, December 2019, when Europol happened to mention in a kind of webinar session format that because the suspect used a combination of Tor and Monero, we could not trace the funds. Almost the very next day, REvil switched from using Bitcoin as their payment method of choice to using Monero, or obligating their victims to pay in Monero. Next slide, please. And so, you know, that's definitely a sign here that, you know, the bad guys are listening to us, and it does present us with an additional challenge, which are privacy coins. Next slide. So that gets me to really kind of the summary here, which are what are the challenges and opportunities that we have in the cryptocurrency ecosystem as far as combating and advancing our technology and our capabilities, right? Number one, I have on here are VASP. Virtual Asset Service Providers, for those that don't live in the AML world. That's a terminology that came from FATF. When we talk about VASP, when we talk about different exchanges, you know, it really can present challenges. It can also present solutions, right? There is nothing better for a criminal than a non-compliant exchange. There is no better mixer out there than running all of your coins through a huge exchange that will not cooperate with law enforcement, because it really turns into this black box. I cannot see, there's no visibility as to what is happening with those funds once they get inside that centralized exchange, right? So, however, on the opposite side of the spectrum, those VASP that do comply, those VASP that aren't even jurisdictionally located in the United States, but yet they still respond to US subpoenas, they respond to European subpoenas. It is a huge assistance, it's a huge help for our investigations, and it's really what helps us get, as I said, get closure on these investigations, possibly even freeze funds, but at least identify the actors that are receiving those funds. That moves us into privacy coins, layer 2. When we talk about privacy coins, you know, really and truly, it's a game of cat and mouse, right? You know, as we get close to, let's say, breaking through layers of security on Monero, we see them add additional layers, right? So it really is kind of this game of cat, and they're only limited the creation and the utilization of privacy coins. The only limitation really is imagination and the current technical capabilities, right? What could assist us with privacy coins is going to be some type of regulation, some type of laws that can actually reduce and limit the accessibility of those privacy coins. If my victims cannot obtain Monero to pay their ransom in Monero, I cannot request them to pay in Monero. I can't obligate them to pay in Monero, and I have to switch to some other type of cryptocurrency, right? As well as I've already hinted at a little bit, the uneven regulation and compliance, that's really what allows some of those exchanges out there to continue to operate as black boxes. So we really have to focus on getting that regulation up to speed across the globe. If an exchange is providing accounts to citizens in certain countries, then they really should have to comply with the regulatory landscape within those particular countries. And that's one way that we kind of get around these global entities that don't really have a headquartered domiciled location. DEXs and DeFi, I mean, how do decentralized entities fall into regulatory environs and compliance, right? We've seen DeFi, this amazing new you know, technology really that's out there, most certainly has come onto the landscape in the past year. You know, as with any new technology, any new opportunity that's out there, we've definitely seen it be exploited. We've seen DeFi fraud and hacks go up every quarter since DeFi has really taken off. So that is one area that we definitely need to pay attention to and look at how do we get those decentralized entities some type of regulation, some type of compliance. And then last but not least, I mean, key here, guys, is information sharing, right? Everything moves at the speed of crypto. Well, the speed of crypto is, you know, in some cases every second. So information sharing has to be tightened up. It has to flow. I was in a panel this morning, actually, where we had the conversation about utilizing blockchain in the use of chain of custody, right? How, you know, you can actually utilize that to control the chain of custody and avoid any type of corruption issues. And we also talked about utilizing blockchain to speed up MLATs, right? Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty. If I need to subpoena an entity in another country, is there a way that we can actually utilize blockchain technology for the certificates and the authorities so that those subpoenas and that information can be obtained in a more timely manner so that we can actually match the speed of crime? That's all I got for you guys. I think I made it in 10 minutes.
I think you did. Thank you very much, Pamela. So we're about to enter the audience Q&A portion of the lightning talk. Just a reminder to everybody, please do submit your questions. The IST team will send them to me here on the chat, and I can ask Pamela as they come in. So we do have our first couple questions coming in, Pamela. So the first one I think that jumped to my mind immediately, as well as to the audience, is why can't we trace Monero?
Well, so in all honesty, there are a lot of groups that are working on Monero. Basically, what happens with Monero privacy coins is the workings are still going on, right? The blockchain, everything, verifying transactions, the mining, everything is still taking place. The transactions of the blockchain exist. I'd like to describe it as there's the big giant curtain hanging in front of it all, right? We can't see that particular blockchain. It's kind of like the Wizard of Oz and the wizards back there working all the levers and stuff behind the curtain until you actually pull back that curtain and see what's going on, right? So we at Ciphertrace have done work on this. There are lots of other groups that have done work. We have broken through a lot of those layers. We can actually see some Monero transactions now. We can see the transactions themselves. We are continuing to build those capabilities. We want to be able to have, you know, some additional attribution that we can add to that. But the challenge really of privacy coins when it comes to exchanges, and one of the ways that we can actually kind of use some of this regulation to our benefit is, if I'm an exchange, I cannot comply with travel rule, which is an AML within the United States, within Singapore, Switzerland, Canada is about to come online with travel rule compliance. I can't comply with travel rule if I can't see the originator and the beneficiary information for those transactions. So if I'm an exchange and I'm receiving a Monero transaction, I don't know where that's coming from. I don't know with whom that's associated, right? So those are some of the challenges. And there's others, right? Litecoin has a Mimblewimble coming online. You know, Zcash has shielded transactions, right? Dash. It's not just Monero. It just happens to be currently the most popular, highest up on the list.
So maybe we can hang on that for just one more minute. Is there anything that can be done more specifically to improve the ability to track coins, or trace coins, should I say, that are kind of specifically designed to avoid traceability?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think limiting the accessibility, right? Like I said, if you limit, look, the reason why Bitcoin is still king when Bitcoin is the slowest, the most, less eco-friendly, as somebody influential recently pointed out to all of us. The reason why it's still king is because of its accessibility and liquidity, right? So if we limit the liquidity of those privacy coins, if we limit the accessibility, right? I cannot execute, Revil cannot continue to require payment in Monero if their victims quite simply cannot get Monero. So there have been proposals. We saw a proposal in France to outlaw Monero. There are, very few exchanges in regulated jurisdictions that actually will accept Monero. The leading exchanges in the United States, you can grab the top two off the top. They do not list Monero within their coins. So I do think that we can limit just the accessibility of it, and that would definitely help with, limiting the use of it per se.
Makes sense. So it sounds like there's very much a cat and mouse game here, right? I think you described a very thoughtful and adapting adversary, right? Like with your combination about the EU and their comments about Monero not being traceable. Can you talk a little bit about how you advance your capabilities to kind of try to stay one step ahead of the adversary?
Yes, for sure. So, I think it's really, again, I think we're all limited by imagination and keeping up to date. Look, there's a reason why I don't script out any of my presentations, and it's because everything changes every day, right? Like I said, I got new ideas from panels that I was on this morning. We are constantly keeping up with just the advancements and the changes in the cryptocurrency landscape. One of the things that I would say for sure is in talking to specifically regulators and other businesses, banks, when we talk to them, is make sure that you actually go out and talk to the experts, right? Because our only job is cryptocurrency. That is our only job, and it's a full-time job to keep up with the changes and advancements in cryptocurrency. Same thing, when you relate to, different, security, right? Cybersecurity, different aspects like that. Trying to do everything in-house. If you were a regulatory, organization or a bank or anything like that, you know, just trying to keep up with all the changes and advancements in technology in-house is quite a challenge. So go out and find the individuals who are the experts. That would probably be my biggest advice for keeping up with, just keeping up with all the changes that happen, you know, on a 24/7 cycle.
Okay. So we actually have a bunch of questions about the mixers. So I'll give you kind of a summation of all of them. If these things are for money laundering, why do they exist? Who has jurisdiction over them? Why aren't they taken down? I'd love your thoughts on all of that.
Yeah, so funny thing about mixers, number one is per FinCEN regulations, mixers are technically not illegal. However, if I were to run a mixer, I would then technically have to register as a money service business with FinCEN, and then I would have to run an effective AML program, and then I would have to report suspicious activity. So I would basically spend all my time reporting suspicious activity if I were a registered mixer. We did see an interesting report, by the way, out of Europol. I think it was a year or so ago. I've used it before in testimony, where they actually analyzed transactions in and out of Wasabi wallet, right, which allow for coin join transactions, and just looking at the risk associated with the movement of funds in and out of those Wasabi wallet transactions. Look, disclaimer, not everything that runs through a mixer or a coin join is illegal. I mean, we all know that. Not everything that runs through Tor is illegal. I mean, we can all kind of put these caveats on there, right? And we can argue that there is a need for certain levels of privacy within cryptocurrency. That said, the utilization of a mixer or a coin join does in fact elevate the risk associated with the transaction based on the data that is available. I mean, there's just no other way to cut that, right? What we do see running in and out of mixers are usually illicit activity or some type of laundering activity. So if someone is using a mixer for privacy reasons, you know, definitely take that into consideration, right? There are many exchanges, if they're running transaction monitoring, they are going to consider that incoming deposit from a mixer, or if you're trying to send out of the exchange to a mixer, they're going to consider that a high risk transaction. And that could affect your status within the exchange. As far as them being illegal, why don't we take them down? We have seen mixers taken down, right? We've seen Best Mixer was taken down. It was being run technically kind of out of Curacao. We saw the Netherlands come along and dismantle that. We see currently there's the case right now pending, the Helix Mixer, right? Individual US citizen running that out of, you know, basically Ohio, between Ohio and Belize. So we do see that occur. Some of the better mixers, just quite frankly, are run in jurisdictions where we don't have reach. And so we can't get in there and take those mixers down with any type of ease. What we can do though is we can analyze those mixers. We can look at how each mixer operates. We can see the manner in which they mix their funds. We can look at the algorithms they're using, and then we can combat that by beginning to trace through those mixer transactions, right? So if we can de-anonymize the mixers, then they become largely irrelevant when it comes to obfuscating funds.
Thanks, Pamela. So I think we have time for maybe one or maybe two more questions. You mentioned a couple of jurisdictional issues. So one question's come in from the chat is regarding the Bitcoin exchanges, right? It sounds like a lot of transactions still happen on Bitcoin. Can you give us a sense for how many, you know, generally comply with law enforcement? How many are reachable through a subpoena, for example? Anything like that?
Yeah, sure. So what we have run is we've actually run statistics on KYC. So do exchanges do KYC? Know your customer, right? Are they getting the identity of their customers when they open accounts? And about 56% of exchanges in the world have weak or porous KYC, right? So we're looking at least half of exchanges out there that don't care really who their customers are. They don't care to get maybe intrusive. Maybe they see it as being intrusive, or maybe they just see it as, you know, kind of allowing you know, any customer to come to their exchange. There are exchanges that are very compliant. There are exchanges outside of the United States, to be honest, that don't have to be compliant, but they are. We most certainly, in the law enforcement community, know who all of those are. I mean, there's thousands of exchanges, so, you know, creating a list would be a little difficult. But, you know, I would say if you have questions about it, reach out to us, reach out to your friendly law enforcement, you know, entity that works cryptocurrency investigations. We all know who they are. We all know which ones will cooperate, which ones won't. And then some of them also have fine lines between, okay, well, we'll respond to a criminal investigation, but we won't respond to civil, for example. Another way, though, that we can enforce compliance and get exchanges to cooperate is going through their banks, right? So exchanges need banks. That banking relationship is really important for them. It's a really sensitive relationship sometimes because it is difficult for some exchanges, depending on where they are, to obtain that banking relationship. So they will go out of their way to maintain the banking relationship. So we have seen some cases in other countries where we were able to actually lean on the bank to get the exchange to provide the information that we were looking for. So there's a couple different avenues that we can explore there.
That's great. Thank you, Pamela. Thank you for a great lightning talk, a great way to start today. Appreciate all of this. Really great information for everybody. Looks like we are just about out of time, so I'd like to transition to our second speaker, who I see on the stage already, Dustin Moody. Dustin is a mathematician in the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, Computer Science Division. Dustin leads the post-quantum cryptography project at NIST. Try to say that 3 times fast. He received his PhD from the University of Washington in 2009, and his area of research deals with elliptic curves and their applications in cryptography. Dustin, over to you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk a little bit about post-quantum cryptography, and I'll explain what that is so you have a feel for that and why it should be important to you. So quantum computers, if you want to go to the next slide, are a research topic that has been of interest to physicists and computer engineers and many scientists around the world. And increasingly, we're seeing some progress in research into them. Fundamentally, these are computers that are built on just a different paradigm than like the classical physics that you often think of. They are built to exploit properties of quantum mechanics. And I'm not going to get into all of it. I don't completely understand all of it myself. But just know that quantum computers, they have a potential to do some explosive things in computing, way beyond what our current classical computers can do today. Instead of operating on bits of zeros and ones, they operate on what are called quantum bits, which are called qubits. And these qubits can be put into superposition, and you can design some algorithms that exploit that. And so when you have that, instead of like a string of zeros and ones, you can actually hold a large number of qubits in many different states at the same time. And that's kind of the reasoning behind why you can get some increase in computing power that is exponential. These quantum computers won't be universal and just solve every problem we throw at them faster than our current computers, but there are certain problems that people have designed algorithms for which they will be very, very effective. There are some limitations. This is a very, high-tech area where a lot of different fields have to come together to build these. And currently, the way the approaches that are being built, these quantum computers are very fragile. They often happen to be built in vacuums at temperatures that are almost at near zero, like absolute zero. Nonetheless, there is progress being made. I put some images on the slide of IBM and Intel and Google, who have all been building larger and larger quantum computers, as well as many other organizations that are working on this sort of project. The reason they are of interest to us in terms of cryptography, if you want to go to the next slide, is that it's been well known for a few decades that they pose a threat to many of the crypto systems that we use today. Specifically, at NIST, we write standards for cryptography, which are documents that explain how to use cryptography in a standard way so that you and the computer that you're wanting, the bank that you're trying to log on to, both implement it in a secure, safe way. We have various standards. The crypto that we use can be broken down into kind of 2 families. One is known as symmetric key, and the other is known as public key crypto. And both are essential for what we use. Now, it's known that with a large-scale quantum computer, all of the public key crypto systems that we use today would be vulnerable. This includes RSA, elliptic curve crypto, the Diffie-Hellman algorithm. So we need to come up with new algorithms to replace these. The symmetric key algorithms would also be impacted, but not as dramatically. We would be able to do things like double the key size and still use the same algorithm. So next slide. This field has been given the name of post-quantum cryptography. And it's the idea that we're looking for crypto that will be able to be run on our current computers and also be safe from attacks from our current computers as well as quantum computers. You might ask, well, why do we need to worry about this today? You know, large-scale quantum computers don't exist. And there's a simple theorem from Mike Mosca that kind of illustrates the threat. Basically, the idea is somebody could be copying down all your encrypted data today and just holding on to it. They can't read it yet because it's encrypted. But maybe in 10 years or however long, you know, a quantum computer comes along, someone will then be able to get access to your information. And if we don't have quantum resistant solutions ready, you know, you won't be providing the information security for the length of time that you hope to, because a quantum computer comes out sooner than you would like. So it's expressed in terms of this x plus y is greater than z, and you can put in what x, y, and z are, you know, for your organization. If you need to protect your information for a long time, x will be a larger number. Y is what we're considered, we're working on at NIST right now. That's the time to get new algorithms adopted, standardized, and implemented out into products. And that just takes time. You can try and speed it up a little bit, but you can't, you know, rush it too fast. So what is Z? How long until we have a large-scale quantum computer? If we look at the next slide, there's a chart from some experts in the field who they went out and surveyed several top experts themselves and asked them, when do you think a large-scale quantum computer would be built that could threaten current crypto systems that we use today? And this chart's kind of their main summary of their findings. If you look at the top row, these experts said, well, in 5 years, there's a very small chance that we would have such a large-scale computer. But if you start looking at 10 years and 15 years, you can see that more and more of these experts thought that there would be a chance that we could have a large-scale quantum computer. And by the time we get to 20 years, almost all of the experts thought there was a greater than 50% chance that such a computer would exist. So nobody knows for certain. This is a research area, but that gives us an idea that a quantum computer could be around in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, something on that time scale. So what are we doing about this problem? Well, at NIST, we've been working on this project for over a decade. We can go to the next slide. And back about 5 years ago, we initiated basically kind of a worldwide cryptographic competition where we called for new crypto systems to be designed and sent into us, and that we would manage in open and a transparent way, a way to vet and analyze these algorithms and choose the ones that were most promising. So back in 2017, we received over 80 submissions sent in to us. And since then, we've proceeded through a series of rounds of analysis. In each round, we look at all the crypto systems. Their specifications and implementations are given in full on our website so that people around the world can also look at them, can do research, and can do benchmarking on them as well. And at the end of each round, we select a smaller number, the ones that seem most promising, to move on for another round of analysis. So you can see currently we're down around, in the third round of analysis, we're about halfway through. And we have 7 finalist algorithms and 8 alternate candidates as well. So those are the ones that we are focusing on that could be standardized at the end of this third round. In just a couple weeks, we're going to have a workshop coming up. So if you're interested in that, that's certainly something you could attend. So next slide. What are we using to judge this? Well, security is job number 1, and they need to be secure against both classical and quantum computers. We have 5 security levels defined so that when submitters send in their crypto systems, they could give us parameter sets and tell us what level of security they are providing. After security, it's performance. This is measured on a variety of platforms. How efficient are these algorithms, as well as things like how large are the keys, how large are the signatures, and so on and so forth. And then there's just a number of other properties that it would be useful to have, but we understand that it's unlikely that a submission would probably have all of these things to a great degree. So next slide. So again, our finalists that we selected are the algorithms that we think could be ready at the end of the third round to be standardized and would be able to be used by a wide number of applications. We also selected some alternates that we feel are still interesting. They still could potentially be analyzed or standardized, but they would need perhaps a fourth round of analysis. So these are the names of the algorithms here. They're based on different mathematical areas, things like lattices and codes, multivariate, isogenies, and so on and so forth. We have a diversity of different backgrounds for these algorithms so that we're not putting all our security eggs in one basket. So next slide. Our timeline, like I said, this third round, we're kind of in the middle, and we expect that at the end of this year, roughly, we will announce the algorithms that will be standardized. There will be some algorithms that continue to be studied in a fourth round, but we will name the ones roughly about the end of this year. And then we'll write up some draft standards. We'll put those out for public comments, and it will probably take us a year or two to get that all done and resolve all the comments. And we expect the final standard to be ready about 2024, that people can then begin using and adopting these algorithms that will be resistant to attacks from a quantum computer. Next slide. So what can organizations do now? There are a lot of things. Basically, you need to be aware of the quantum threat and be planning ahead. Do a quantum risk assessment. Look at what crypto you're using. Is it vulnerable? Make sure your staff is aware of these issues. Make sure there's someone assigned to make a plan for your organization to be ready for this transition, which will be coming to these new algorithms. In short, just the sooner you act, the better it will be. Less scrambling is always better business practice. So just the final slide. I think I'm getting close on time here. We're getting close to where we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and we will have algorithms ready to be standardized. NIST is grateful for the help that everyone is giving in spreading the word about this threat. And then I've got contact info there that you can find out more information. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Dustin. Appreciate that. A reminder, we're about to enter the audience Q&A portion of Justin's discussion. Please do submit your questions, and the IST team will forward them over to me to ask Dustin. Dustin, if I could ask maybe one of my own questions just to start off with. If you had to explain quantum computing or maybe quantum cryptography to a policymaker in 30 seconds, how would you do it?
Well, I think that the way I would approach that is explain that quantum computers are this new technology that's being built by a lot of big companies, and they are making very active progress. There'd be a lot of positive applications for our society, a lot of good things in science and medicine. But in crypto, they would break some of the crypto systems that we use. And so we need to have replacement crypto systems designed that will be safe from these attacks from a quantum computer. And depending on how much more time, then we could get into more specifics. But
yeah. Oh, that's great. That's actually probably one of the best that I've heard. So appreciate that. Okay, first audience question. How can something be deemed to be quantum resistant when we haven't reached widespread quantum computing yet?
Excellent question. And that certainly is a challenge. When we don't yet have these computers, we don't know how expensive they'll be to run, how fast they will run. But we have to do the best we can in determining how much quantum security is provided by these algorithms. And so the designers of these algorithms, they look at the algorithms that will run on such a quantum computer, and they extrapolate and figure out how many gates it would take. And even though we cannot get precise numbers, we can come up with some pretty good estimates to know how efficient these attacks will work and how much resources would be required. And then we can kind of gauge how much security we then get. So yeah, we don't have any exact answers on that, but we look at the known algorithms that would work on a quantum computer, and you're able to extrapolate some answers as best as you can.
Great. So you mentioned AES. There have been a couple questions about the kind of international collaboration aspect of this, and I think we all have the sense that there's a little bit more stress in the international community these days, particularly when it comes to technological issues. So I guess there's a question from the audience that, is there any concern that you guys have that allowing teams from, maybe nations that we are competitive with or even adversarial with compete within this process?
Good question, yeah. At NIST, we believe in we believe in very strong crypto algorithms that get the scrutiny of as many people as possible. And that's one of the interesting things about modern cryptography, is that you assume that everybody knows exactly how your crypto system works. And so it does not hurt to let more people see that. So yeah, we have engaged in international cooperation on many of our crypto algorithms. You mentioned AES. That's a block cipher that is used around the world ubiquitously, and everyone very much believes in the security of AES. And so this is kind of a similar way that we're designing these post-quantum algorithms. Is we rely on our internal expertise at NIST, but then we also are grateful for the resources that the crypto community around the world can also take a look at this. And it's been very good to see that we're all working together so that we get strong post-quantum cryptography algorithms as a result of this. There are some countries that aren't participating as much. I think countries like Russia and China seem to be trying to do their own thing, but to a large degree, a lot of the rest of the world is cooperating together on this.
Great, thank you. A kind of similar process question here. Can you talk a little bit more about the post-quantum cryptography program? And in particular, are there any communities or sectors that NIST would like to receive input from?
Yeah, so the post-quantum crypto project at NIST, we have a strong team of experts. There's about 15 of us who are spending a lot of time, on this project. But we do talk to various, interest stakeholders in various different aspects. There's a lot of academics that are participating in this process at universities around the world. They are cryptography researchers, they're mathematicians, and there are workshops and journals and conferences where we regularly see them and communicate with them. We also work with industry a lot. Very much we want to know that these algorithms that we're looking at right now, these finalists, will they work for your applications? If you learn more about the algorithms like Kyber and Saber and Entru, you can see how big are their key sizes, how efficient are they. We would love to hear, do they work for your applications? They are a little bit bigger than what we use right now in terms of RSA and ECC, but they're not too much bigger. Are there applications where you have constraints? So is there a limit in terms of how big the signature can be? Or do you not care so much about how large the public key is, you only care how large the ciphertext is? So those kinds of things we're very much interested in hearing.
Great, thanks, Dustin. Now I'll turn to one more arguably technical question. Can you please summarize the current post-quantum status of hash signatures, say, for example, validating firmware?
So hash-based signatures, there are two types of hash-based signatures. There's what's called stateful and stateless. Stateful means that the implementation has to keep track of the internal state. And because of that, it has to be done very carefully. If you make any small mistake, you completely shoot yourself in the foot and you lose all security. So that was outside of the scope of our competition-like process. But nonetheless, there are some algorithms, XMSS and LMS, that have been standardized by the IETF, and NIST also has another document that standardizes these stateful hash-based algorithms so that you could begin to use them already. The caveat is that these are not general purpose digital signatures. They should only be used in locations where you can carefully manage the state. And in both of the documents that outline these standards, they explain what those use cases should look like. Code signing is one of them that if you're careful, you could use stateful hash-based signatures so that you're already getting quantum resistance. I should say in our competition process, we do have a stateless version of hash-based signatures. It's called Sphinx Plus. And so there, they redesign the algorithm so you don't have to manage the state. There's some trade-offs there. The performance is not quite as nice because of that. But if you're, the security is something we can trust very, very good though, because we understand exactly how the security of that system works and we have high confidence in it.
Great, thanks, Dustin. I'd like to turn now towards a discussion about the risk, the potential risk from quantum computing. One listener wrote in, this is all great progress. 20 years ago, we heard that quantum computing was 20 years out, and now it seems like it's 20 years out again. Do you have any reason to believe that there's been meaningful progress on that front, such that we should be concerned about the risk level? And then a similar question came in, kind of regarding how widespread does the use of quantum computing need to be in order for us to really be concerned?
Okay, yeah. So yeah, I'd agree that 20 years ago, people were saying kind of similar things. We have seen progress in the size of quantum computers being built. So 20 years ago, they were extremely small. What we're seeing from some of the larger companies now, they are getting bigger. They have close to 100 qubits, and they have plans to increase up to 1,000 qubits. So we are seeing some progress. I would say we haven't noticed any kind of extreme breakthrough that it would indicate that we are very, very close to having large-scale quantum computers around. But I would say that there has been steady progress, and more experts in the field have been comfortable saying, yeah, we're making progress, and it looks like it could be 10 to 20 years. 20 years ago, there were very few people who would even try and put a number on it, but we are seeing more and more experts feeling confident about that. In terms of how much quantum computers do there need to be before there's a risk, I think most people would be concerned as soon as anybody had one. If just one government, if just one large corporation, as soon as they have one, they can start to exploit that for their advantages. So I would say as soon as you have one, it's something that you should probably start to be worried about, especially because we may not know who is the first person to have one of these. They might very likely won't tell us that.
That's helpful. Thank you, Dustin. I see we're just about out of time here. I'd like to thank you for your participation. A great conversation. Thank you for joining us. I know I learned a lot. I hope our audience did as well.
Thank you very much.
And now I'd like to turn things back over to our CEO, Phil Reiner. Phil?
Thank you, Mike. And thank you to Pamela and to Dustin for two conversations around some pretty critical technical issues. We're now going to turn to Job. Job's coming to us from Fastly. For those of you who haven't had a chance to engage with Job or to hear Job talking about these issues, I think this is going to be a fantastic deep dive into BGP routing security, thinking about what some of the solutions might be. Those of you who don't know Job, Job comes to us as someone who's deeply ensconced in the community. He's been doing this for what now, Job, 15, 20 years?
15 right? Years, thereabouts.
15 years. So he knows a thing or two about what we're talking about here today, both from an operational, but also from the engineering, the architecture sides of the coin. He's someone who has presented extensively on these issues. So I'm going to get out of the way, turn things over to Job. Thank you, Job, for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I'm Job Snijders. I work for Fastly, where I dabble in Fastly's BGP routing security posture. And I use various tools to help the organization remain safely and securely connected to the rest of the internet. Now, let's dive into how some of this works, what the concepts are that we are even talking about. Next slide, please. I want to expand on what BGP is, how we are protecting the BGP plane of existence, and how that has evolved throughout the years. I want to talk about some nasty, sharp edges I found in researching RPKI, and then a call to action where I will brazenly ask this community for support if it is available. Next slide, please. So what is this BGP and IRR thing? In the beginning, there was BGP, and BGP is used by computer nodes to tell each other where they can locate network elements. And each computer node tells the other computer nodes what they can reach, and then the totality of all those communications forms our planet-wide internet network. This is called the global routing system, or the default free zone. There are various cool names for this. The cool thing about BGP is that it can very quickly adapt or work around issues. For instance, if there is a optical fiber cut, the BGP session between those two computer nodes will go down, And this allows the system to reconverge, to find new pathways to communicate through other available paths. The bad thing about BGP is that mistakes propagate at global speed very quickly. If I make a typo in configuring a BGP speaker, for instance, I type a 7 instead of a 6. You can see on my keyboard that the 6 and 7 are really close to each other. This mistake in routing will propagate to all other computer nodes in the default free zone. And this can potentially harm the business that was dependent on the prefix which I mistyped. So how do we make such a system that is excellent at propagating incorrect information more secure? And this is why I call it a tale of two systems. There is the IRR, Internet Routing Registry, and this is a separate database from BGP. And BGP is the live and dynamic system, and then we can use the IRR information to restrict what information should go where. And I think that the internet's robustness stems from, in part, stems from operators having to essentially make two mistakes. They have to make a mistake in the BGP plane, and they have to replicate a similar mistake into the IRR plane. And if you make the mistake in both places, that is where information, that is when information has the highest chance of propagating incorrectly propagating to other systems. But this IRR system is not really perfect. It is a plain text database that basically anybody has write access into. And it was clearly designed in a different time with a different mindset, different expectations about whether people would behave well or would make misuse of this IRR system. Next slide, please. So enter RPKI. RPKI as a solution occupies a similar space as what IRR occupies. The biggest difference between RPKI and IRR is that the RPKI is cryptographically signed using a framework of X509 certificates. And the really cool thing about RPKI is that everybody can verify whether the owner of a prefix was actually the one authorizing a given ASN to originate a route. And the RPKI also has as a natural part of its design that you can only create attestations or route origin authorizations for prefixes that were delegated towards you. It is a hierarchical system. And I think that the element of cryptography and the assurance that only the prefix owner is the one in a position to make certain statements make for a tremendous improvement over the IRR system. Next slide, please. But with cryptography, the chain is as strong as the weakest link. And if we're taking information from this global RPKI system and transforming it and then loading it straight into these BGP routers, it means that the RPKI validators, the components that take the raw X509 data and validate it all the way up to the trust anchors, are a point of attack. They are an element that previously did not exist, but now they are in common use in the largest networks in the world. And since they are connected to the routers, or that the information that comes out of these RPKI validators guides route decision making, I took it upon myself to take a look and inspect how these validators were performing, in the sense of, were they actually secure? Because oftentimes when we talk about cryptography, it doesn't automatically make things secure. You have to make sure that the implementation of the algorithms does what you hope it does. Next slide, please. So it turned out that in early 2020, this is only 1.5 years ago, this is still very recent, the state of RPKI validators was actually not that great. It turned out that the internet routing industry had flown around the world, advertised to everybody, hey, get on the RPKI bandwagon. This is an awesome technology that will help safeguard your networks. But all the while this was happening, the software that was supposed to live up to this promise was not actually doing what it should be doing. And a few issues that I uncovered was, for instance, that not all validators had understood what RPKI manifests are for. In the X509 framework, you can validate who signed what, but there is no feature in the X509 framework to confirm whether the set of objects that you have in your possession is complete. And RPKI manifests are a signed object that references other objects, and then you know if you have a whole bundle of digital objects or whether some are missing. Other mistakes were really, I would say, of the amateur level, where the value of certificate revocation lists was underappreciated and not implemented by some. Crazy old bugs that originate from a mispublication in 1996 by the ITU on the cryptographic message syntax standard resurface now more than 20 years later in the shape of variants of the CVE 2014-8275 problems. The use of XML in RPKI also brought all the downsides of XML, such as overflowing the memory of a validator. And then finally, the validators themselves were not the only ones that were problematic. The BGP implementations that relied on RPKI information also contained problems. For instance, on Juniper, there was a bug where a RPKI covered prefix would briefly flip to invalid, which means unroutable, where it negatively impacts the control plane and thus the forwarding plane if the RPKI ROA is removed. And in lab setups, this only lasts a few milliseconds, but in a production environment where there's millions of BGP messages passing through a BGP speaker, those few milliseconds can become multiple seconds or even single-digit numbers of minutes. So, boy oh boy, deploying RPKI at global scale was a terrible adventure, and a lot of software defects were uncovered. And my message to this audience is that we cannot assume at face value that the RPKI validators are doing what they are supposed to do. I would encourage people involved in this space to read the source code of the validators before committing themselves in one particular direction. Next slide, please. So, having listed a bunch of problems, there is a bigger problem. There is a lack of software to properly do RPKI signing and validation, unfortunately. There is OpenBSD has decent validation software. Another software house, Zignal Labs, has put out a validator and signing software, but that's roughly it at the moment. There are not that many organizations willing to touch this problem space and commit engineering resources. So to alleviate the negative effects of a monoculture, I would propose that this industry investigates whether it is feasible to resurrect the reference implementation called RPKI.net from Dragon Research. My estimate is that it will take roughly 1 people year and about $150,000 to do a maintenance update of the software. And this would bring this industry from access to 2 validators to access to 3 validators, which would make me feel much more comfortable when using this type of technology at global scale. Next slide, please. So if you are in a position, if you have access to funds to help good for the internet projects, please reach out to me. I can offer more details and elaborate on why it is necessary to keep investing in high quality software. But we also arrived at the time at the end of my lightning talk, so I would like to divert the microphone back to the host and take some questions if there are any.
Yeah, Joe, we've got a couple coming in here, and so thank you for that. First of all, I think it's incredibly important that you're making very clear what can actually be done about it. One of the things that I wanted to, on my own before I go to some of the questions that have come in, is to just back up a little bit in terms of that validation problem, in terms of the uptake and implementation of RPKI. How big of a problem is this, though? Right? Like, this as much as we care about trying to solve these routing challenges, until it's really really like a financial problem for folks, they're not going to take the steps that are necessary in order to move in the direction you're talking about. 150K is really, it's nothing, right? Why has it really risen to the level of enough of a problem for folks to take the steps that are necessary? What do you think about that piece of it?
Well, the internet industry has wholeheartedly committed themselves to using RPKI to protect the routing system. BGP is an unencrypted, unsecured protocol, and then we take the RPKI and sort of map it onto the BGP plane to make sure that BGP is not doing things that are without authorization. So I think it is excellent that the industry, after years of talking about solving the problem, has leaped forward and picked RPKI. Like, this is what we're going to use. Everybody use RPKI. But like with many projects in this industry, it depends on, it all lands on the shoulders of a select few individuals who are underpaid, understaffed, under-resourced. And I think in the case of RPKI, if we must make sure it never leads to a false sense of security. If you commit your network to rely on the RPKI, it means that the RPKI can strengthen your posture, but it also means it can wipe out your business if the validator is somehow compromised or perverted in some way. So if we go to the early years of DNS, when there was only bind, every time a 0-day would drop, everybody was affected. It was a terrible state of being. And the DNS community eventually managed to get to a better space with the introduction of other DNS softwares that were not based on bind. But in RPKI, I fear we're almost in a similar space as when we all relied on bind, because there's a lack of good quality software. And I think that 150K, it's not a lot, but it's drawing blood from a stone, because it's not a normal SKU. It's challenging to find money for good for the internet projects.
Yeah, no, we live that every day. So what is kind of what's your sense of the uptake adoption of RPKI at this point? How broad has it actually begun to be? You mentioned that it's being taken up by the entire community, but how far has it actually gotten, and what do you see happening in that regard kind of over the next 2 to 3 years?
RPKI is really big at the moment. All major internet exchanges use RPKI on their route servers. Route servers are a network component that helps distribute routing information amongst internet exchange participants. All the big carriers like Lumen, NTT, Telia, Cogent, Tata, you name it, use RPKI extensively. The world's smallest networks and the world's largest networks use RPKI. So our dependency on this infrastructure is incredible. It's like DNSSEC. It is widely in use, and it's hidden under the hood of the engine, but it is here, and it will impact your connectivity if you end up using a validator that is not secure.
Yeah, well, let me do that. We've got a little bit of time left. There's 2 other questions that I think are actually really important, and then we're going to turn things over to our fantastic panel that's coming up. This gets back a little bit of that incentives question that I was asking Mingo. So what's the incentives for ISPs routing through traffic that don't get paid, that are at the endpoint to filter out malicious traffic? I'm not sure if that made sense to you. What's the incentive structure here for ISPs to engage in it? It sounds to me like from what you were just saying, they kind of already are.
Deploying RPKI is what I would call a selfish act. It is to protect your network against unauthorized routing messages. Anybody can insert a routing message into your system to try and trick you to get traffic to flow in a direction it should not be flowing. And RPKI is a tool to thwart against such activity. So RPKI is to protect your own network. It is not something you do to help others. It's to help yourself.
All right. I could keep talking about this with you all day, Job. And I think, you know, as Job put out there, it's kind of a call to action for those who are out there in the community who care about this stuff. Let's help get on this. That's part of what we've engineered here today as part of these conversations. There's practical steps that can be taken to help make the internet more secure for everybody. Job, thank you for your time. Really great to have you here with us today. Thanks again for the lightning talk.
Thank you.